welcome back to my channel. Now, with the new Scream film coming out this Friday, decided we could use this week on the channel to be Scream Week. And look at the original 4 films directed by Wes Craven on Monday through Thursday, before on Friday finally get into my thoughts on the new Kevin Williamson directed Scream 7, a film that I have mild, tempered expectations around, but nonetheless I hope it can surprise and really deliver an iconic, classic slasher film which the franchise so desperately needs. Now, I decided today will be Scream 1 and we'll go in order, so I had to crack back open my old Blu-ray 5-film set. This was released back in about 2011, I believe, around the time that Scream 4 was coming out in theaters. And that's a film that I still have on DVD, and then I have those on Blu-ray. So maybe at some point I'll have to upgrade it to 4K, but for now it works just fine. And I can't wait to get into my thoughts on these movies with you guys. So without any further ado, let's get into it. Let's review Scream. Oh, and just a word of warning to those of you who'd want to pick this up. 5-film set, it only has the original 3 films. There's 2 documentaries sort of padding out the numbers of this set. So that's a bit misleading. It came out around 2011 though, so there wasn't even 5 movies yet in the series. It was just about, catching up with the trilogy before the newest one came out. Now, with that being said, I put in the Scream Blu-ray last night, I watched it, and it absolutely still delivers. It holds up perfectly. It's a classic for a reason, and it still has such a strong legacy and influence on the genre even to today. And I think that this movie absolutely deserves all the praise and plaudits it's received. It's such a fun movie, and it's got so much just energy and just funniness in it, but also brutal kills and a lot of depth and characterization, and we care about these characters, and it's really speaking to the genre in a multifaceted way, and it has all these themes and ideas jam-packed into this movie, and it all just lands really well. It's basically a masterpiece of horror, and I think the first sort of way I want to sort of approach this review is by looking at the director of the movie, Wes Craven. I think he was the absolute perfect choice. I know that it was sort of a really hot screenplay back in the 90s when Kevin Williamson sort of started to shop it around, and I know a lot of people, it was known as Scary Movie back then, but they obviously changed the name, which I think was a smart decision. Quentin Tarantino, I know, at one point really, wanted to get involved in the movie, but he wasn't picked ultimately, and I think that was the right decision. I think Craven, with his understanding of the genre, his experience in it, his own sort of frustrations with the genre, frustrations with being stuck making these types of movies over and over again, he was like the perfect ingredient to throw in with Kevin Williamson to make this absolutely beautiful recipe. Quentin Tarantino, I think, would have just made it he wouldn't have had the tact to do it.
Hey, it's called tact, you fuck rag.
Right? He wouldn't have had the ability to really sort of understate certain aspects. He would have pushed things way too far, and it would have just not been as fun or as smart or as understanding of the genre. I think he obviously has an appreciation and love for horror movies, but I don't think he could actually direct one in the way that Craven did, especially with this material specifically. I think Craven, with all the experiences he had had and developed and everything he had learned through being in what he basically called the ghetto of working within the horror genre, I think that it really made him the perfect, frustrated older director to be able to just put everything into this movie. And I think it works really well. Craven's understanding of knowing when to push things and when to still be able to deliver brutal kills without going over the top gory really worked for this movie, because this isn't a movie about the elaborate special effects. It's not trying to wow you with all that, though there is really good and effective understated effects. The point of the movie is for you to care about these characters, is for the meta commentary and the self-awareness and everything to be sort of there to bring in the audience, but at the same time to be able to deliver as a very solid and effective horror movie. It's not just like a parody. I know a lot of people call it that. It's not really a parody. It's doing a slasher film better than anyone else does it, while also having that meta commentary, that self-awareness, that ability to communicate with fans in a more direct way as far as all the references that Williamson put in there. And he really did have a great understanding of the horror genre. You can tell he was a big fan, but he was also frustrated by things. And you can tell he's trying to sort of set the genre back on the right sort of lane that's supposed to be going on, one that really prioritizes character development, really prioritizes making us care about things. A lot of slasher movies, especially as the 80s waned on and into the 90s, They stopped being scary because it was all about cheering on Jason and Michael and Freddy, and it was about being funny and silly, and it was about the special effects being ridiculous and over the top, and oh, did you see that kill? Did you see that kill? It was all about that. It was about being like a top 10 highlight reel of Freddy Krueger kills. It wasn't about, an actual interesting storyline. It wasn't about interesting themes or politics, social commentary. Nothing about that was being infused into those movies, except for maybe New Nightmare, which really did have a lot of interesting things, and it was kind of that meta narrative before Scream for Wes Craven. So I think that's another reason why he was a really good choice to be the director, because he had already done something so similar and had sort of mined into the same sort of areas of horror, but to much less sort of wide appeal. Now it was time to do one in a mainstream way that would really resonate with young people, and I think it did absolutely. So you really had some smart, creative craftsman type people working on this project. You had Wes Craven, obviously. You had Kevin Williamson, who was a really young, energetic writer that infused the screenplay with so many great references and such a great understanding of audience psychology, of what the sort of fans want, expect, know about the genre, what they're frustrated by with, but also giving them things that they don't necessarily know or would say that they want from a horror film, really pushing them in ways that art is always supposed to. It's not always supposed to be just a feedback loop of exactly what you want, which is what kind of Friday the 13th, Halloween, and Nightmare on Elm Street, and all these other slashers had devolved into, just being sort of populist filmmaking with no real sort of roots to it or any depth to it. And look, I love populist filmmaking at times. It can be a lot of fun. But also when the whole subgenre and the whole genre really devolves into that sort of style of filmmaking, it can really just be poisonous to the health of the genre. And I'm not saying you need to make like these super classy upscale horror movies or anything. It's not about that. It's not about making like art films. But it's about having an awareness and intelligence and an intentionality behind what you're doing beyond just appealing to the lowest common denominator for horror movies. It's not just about the cool kills and let's make annoying characters that we kill off one by one and make you cheer for the killer. Let's actually go back to the drawing board and make there be some serious suspense and tension and make you actually like scared for what's going to happen to these characters and want them to survive and like them as human beings, and to actually feel like the killers are, just scumbags that you don't like and that you are cheering against and you're scared by, and there's actual weight and depth to everything that happens. That's what makes a good slasher movie, and that's what Kevin Williamson and Craven were trying to do, and they absolutely deliver in spades here. And it absolutely starts by the great setting of the mood that they had with that opening scene. Drew Barrymore was a great choice, and obviously this already shows the sort of awareness that Craven and Williamson had of the genre. This is sort of a callback to Psycho, right? You get a really big name and you kill him off right at the beginning. That was an old sort of calling card of a lot of different slasher movies. This is not something that is just like something that Scream was doing, but it was sort of a wink and a nod already to the audience. Like, hey, look, we're understanding the genre. And of course, there's all sorts of references littered in, and there's the sort of trivia game and all this stuff that real horror fans and geeks would understand and know, while at the same time having mainstream appeal, because it's not something that takes away from the viewing experience. I wouldn't think if you don't know about all these references. I think you just sort of think, okay, these are just really movie obsessed people, and that's sort of something that a lot of people were in the 90s and still are today. We're absolutely obsessed with sort of the pop culture, right? We still are absolutely. This was just a pop culture movie about pop culture within the very sort of niche genre of horror. So I think that there's a lot of smart things going on already just from the setting up of how they did the opening with Drew Barrymore and her and Ghostface having that conversation. And it's filmed really well and it's crafted in a really smart way that builds and ratchets on the tension. And it also has really effective voices. There's so many moments in this movie where, like, if you did something wrong, it would really weaken the effect. And that voice needed to be nailed, and it absolutely was. And it's a menacing, scary voice. At first, it's kind of like, okay, it's like a guy doing a sexy voice. But then you realize, no, actually, there's something much more sinister in the voice. And once it kind of flips on a dime like that, it really does send a shiver down your spine, a chill just enters the air, and Drew Barrymore can feel it, and her performance really delivers a vulnerable young teenage girl that seems to be having fun on the phone, but then it very quickly shifts, and she's afraid for her life. And I think that that's just such a great opening. And then another kind of underrated and underappreciated, I think, aspect of this opening is the absolutely gut-wrenching moment. It's just heart-wrenching to see their parents, Casey Becker's parents, and especially her mom. The reaction they have to finding the kid is just, it's so brutal. And it just, already the kill alone of Casey Becker was a brutal and effective kill that didn't overdo anything. But then you sort of have the added punch at the end of the mom's reaction to that. And it's so tough to watch, but it really sets the mood of, you're going to care about these characters. This is really going to be scary. This is really going to be tense, and there's going to be a lot of suspense to this. So really a great job of setting the mood, of understanding the sort of expectations that you're placing onto the audience, how you're already playing with the audience psychology, you're already understanding what they expect to happen, you're kind of delivering it, but in this really smart way that makes everything have a whole different kind of perspective to it. So we get from that opening already a set expectation that gets continually delivered on, but also not only is the tone consistent throughout as far as you have a mixture of this really fun sort of atmosphere, great performances by the cast, and it's also kind of funny at times, but it's also very scary and brutal with suspense and tension and all that stuff that you love out of a great horror movie. And it's consistently intermingled in just the perfect mix. Craven and Williamson fusing together to really bring depth and characterization to a kind of goofy and silly movie at the same time so that one thing doesn't overpower the other. If this was just done completely straight, it would probably be like overly brutal and not have much mainstream appeal. But the fun factor of it, that's one of the words that I hear a lot of people use, and I think it's a very apt word to use for this film, and that's fun. It's just got so many fun characters, fun one-liners and dialogue, fun visual callbacks and visual filmmaking. There's so many smart little things done there with the visuals, with the sound, with so many different aspects in the audience psychology that you really have to understand. That I think if you're going to make a great horror movie is what your audience is going through while watching, and I think you have to be a fan to fully appreciate and understand that. So this is a film that understands the exact mix it needs to have between brutality and sort of fun and funniness. And there's a lot of comic relief that goes on throughout this movie, but it's never at the expense of the characters in a way where it dehumanizes them. There is a lot of dehumanization going on. There's a lot of desensitization. These teenagers are absolutely brutal about each other and about their own deaths, and are not able to process them in normal ways. They process everything through the lens of their movie watching and their own like media obsession and their pop culture obsessions. And everyone is reacting in that way, even the adults. Nobody can take any of this seriously anymore because they've all become so immune to it, and they only look at everything as like one big movie. And I think that that's what makes Sydney so effective as a final girl, is that she is someone who is a victim of this type of violence. So she's one of the only few that can see through this really gross way that we talk about it and look at violence, and is able to really appreciate it and understand the weight and the depth of everything. And she's going through it herself in her own sort of PTSD as a result of her mom's death. And this is really smart filmmaking with the way they talk about trauma and the way that her character deals with it. It really does feel like a teenage girl going through it. And this is way before trauma became like this overused trope and cliche that we have now in modern elevated horror. So I think that this was one of the smartest ways it's been incorporated in a film, and it really adds a lot of depth and weight to her character. And I think that's what makes this sort of a film that's really in conversation with other slasher films by condemning the way that they talk about death and they handle it. They all just think it's one big joke and you move on quickly and everyone just kind of moves on from death very quickly, but that's not how it is in real life. There's these slow, messy, traumatic cycles, and I think that that trauma that lingers, which you can sometimes see explored in like slasher sequels from time to time or horror movie sequels, but what we get here is someone who's already going through that, and then to have this new layer of violence and fear instilled in her, it's just such a perfect way of writing this story. And I think that the characterization is so expertly crafted by Williamson and delivered by some really talented actors and actresses under the direction of Craven, who really does understate some of the more ridiculous elements to give everyone a sense of depth and characterization and reality and groundedness to them, while still being a really fun movie. And I think all the actors in this movie do a great job. I think Neve Campbell, she is just an awesome actress, and I think she really like I said, she delivers the vulnerability of a teenage girl, especially one that's going through what she's going through. And she really has depth and she really has growth that she demonstrates throughout the movie. And she really sort of becomes this kind of kick ass final girl badass that we all love to cheer for at the end of it. And she's already kind of got that in her, but she slowly grows an understanding of how messed up everybody else is and her own ability to protect herself from the just craziness of the world. And I think a lot of the ways that they do the characterization in this movie plays into how they do gender politics, which I'm going to get into in a little bit, but I want to continue to praise some of these actors. I think that Matthew Lillard does a great job as Stu Macher. I think Jamie Kennedy delivers a funny Randy character. And I also really want to give huge props to Rose McGowan. She's one of the funnest characters in this movie. I think Tatum was someone that I kind of didn't appreciate as much as I should have because I'm so used to all the other sequels where she's dead already. But she is such a fun character here. She has so many great one-liners. She has great characterization and depth to her as well. She's a really fun, funny, caring character, a great friend, a great example of sort of a teenage girl in media and one that's really showing the power of teenage girl friendship between Tatum and Sydney. And I think that's such a great relationship and a friendship that obviously gets severed, and that's really sad. And her death is sort of straddling that line again of sort of funniness and a fun sort of death that we kind of enjoy watching, while at the same time understanding the ramifications of such a death and how scary it would be. But it's kind of hard because Rose McGowan is so much fun as a character that her death scene is probably one of the ones that has the least amount of brutality to it, because she obviously gives the iconic line about, "Oh, don't kill me, Ghostface, I want to be in the sequel."
No, please don't kill me, Mr. Ghostface. I want to be in the sequel.
But then her actual death is also just so ridiculous and over the top. And I think that is one of the few times where they kind of did go over the top a bit with the deaths, but I think it works for her character. I think Courtney Cox does a really good job as a sociopathic television reporter. I think she really, anytime it seems like she maybe has some humanity to her, or she has a moment of actual depth, it's just completely dismissed. It's no, actually, I actually am as just insane as you think I am, and I really have no actually ability to understand this in human terms.
If I'm right about this, I could save a man's life. Do you know what that could do for my book sales?
And that's sort of representing the media and the way that the media looks at these deaths. It's not just horror movies. And I think that's what this film is kind of condemning everyone in our whole mass culture as to how we interpret these things, how we sort of deal with them in a sort of public way. And I think that Scream is just overall so many good performances here, so much great commentary here. David Arquette is so much fun as Dewey. Obviously Matthew Lillard, I said already. Stu Macher, he's great in that. Skeet Ulrich does a really good job here as well with Billy Loomis. He seems like a real scumbag, like I said, but you can also understand why a teenage girl would be attracted to him, not just for his looks, but also just the way he handles himself, even though he is an insane person. You also have Jamie Kennedy, like I said, does a good job as Randy. You have some other really good performances that are a little bit smaller here and there. The sheriff is he's suspicious, he's not suspicious himself, but he's constantly suspecting everybody. Randy's everybody's a suspect. Well, he is thinking that. He's constantly there's a little moment where he looks at Henry Winkler's character with a little bit of suspicion. It's he's sort of why is he touching Sydney in the way he is? It's a little moment that I didn't notice before, I don't think, but it really does add a little layer there. And Henry Winkler, he's another guy who gives a fun performance. Though I think his death is definitely one of the worst scenes in the movie. I think it's completely unnecessary. And I believe that the studio sort of mandated that death scene because they just felt like there was too much downtime between deaths, which is exactly kind of the wrong mentality you should be having with a movie like this. And I think it would have been fine without it, honestly. And it really doesn't fit within the characters of Billy or Stu, and it just seems completely pointless and dumb. And really, his death in general, it was meant to, I guess, be fun, but it also just kind of... I love Henry Winkler, and I think he does a good job in that scene. It's executed fine enough, but it's just completely unnecessary and pointless, and it's not about the adults being killed off. That's kind of against the whole point. The point is it's about these teenagers being killed off because it's teens killing other teens, and especially killing women. That's kind of the big point of the movie is about killing the women, because that is sort of a huge part of it, is the gender politics that are on display. This is something that Craven kind of slowly developed over the course of his career. He slowly became more and more sort of obsessed with talking about gender politics and using that in his movies. Eventually you would see that in something like Red Eye in a really strong way, but you also really see it here in Scream. This has a really strong thematic core of like feminism in the movie, which isn't really something you would necessarily expect, and I think it adds a layer of depth to the movie that makes it really fun and enjoyable on a rewatch. And here's why I think that. When rewatching the movie, you notice Stu and Billy in the way that they interact with each other as if it's all one big performance, and they're performing in front of their girlfriends about being sort of decent guys and about being decent boyfriends, but really underneath all that is this really deep level of misogyny and hatred for women in which they're trying to go and kill them. So yes, they do kill guys on occasion, but it's really more about killing women, and it's about controlling and policing their sexuality, which is something I also never really observed in the way I did in this movie. Or in this viewing of the movie, rather. So what I mean by that is that Billy is really sort of contemptuous of Sydney's mother. He doesn't like that she broke up the marriage, and he calls her all sorts of names, right, slut-shaming her, and that is one way of policing sexuality of women. But then at the same time, while he's saying all this stuff about Sydney's mother, he also is holding all this hatred for Sydney because she won't sleep with him. And he really constantly trying to push her and doesn't understand why. Oh, you've become basically like you've become this way because of your mom's death, and when is it going to be over? When's this sort of PTSD going to be done so I can just sleep with you and just get it over with? And then when she does, it's like they mock her for it. And so it's like you can't win. You either are the person who's not sleeping with them, in which case you're just too prudish and you're just a dumb woman, basically, that won't sleep with me. And then at the same time, you know, if you do give in, then you just become sort of a slut. So it's like constant hatred of women, constant trying to control their sexuality, just trying to sleep with them, then to dismiss them and shove them to the side and hate them for it. And then the film obviously really does take on this idea of the final girl as a feminist sort of idea. So Carol Clover talked about it in her book, Men, Women, and Chainsaws. She coined the term final girl and talked about how it was sort of a feminist idea because she was really trying to, in an academic sense, kind of undermine a lot of the people that were saying that horror movies were sexist, especially slasher movies back in like the 1980s. So what Williamson and Craven do here is they really do empower women to go and fight back against their attackers, to take on the final girl mantle, for us to sort of view through the eyes of not only a traumatized teenage girl, but also sort of someone that we would dismiss as just some dumb sort of reporter. And I mean, she is sociopathic and insane, but she is competent and she's able to handle herself. And she's the one that strikes the sort of blow that sort of helps kill off some of these characters, right? Kills off Billy, and then obviously Stu gets killed by the television by Sydney, and then Sydney delivers the final gunshot. And that's what really it's about, sort of turning into these badass survival characters. They're the final girls that make it through the narrative. They're the ones that outsmart and outwit and outsurvive the men that think that they're so much above all these women and that are trying to kill them in brutal ways because they get off on it. And I think that this sort of gender politics is something that you see on display in Red Eye and some of other of Craven's work, and it's something he really started to kind of delve into quite a bit and very frequently, and especially with his character Sidney Prescott. And you'll see this throughout the Scream movies, and I think it's one of the underlying sort of big currents within the series is sort of feminism, which I didn't necessarily, I think, appreciate the level to which it's present here in the first movie, but it's absolutely fully on display here. And it makes this a really interesting rewatch in hindsight. And I think that's kind of goes hand in hand with the fact that they're trying to make us care about these characters. You know, and a lot of times we kind of just like, oh, just a dumb teenage girl, she has sex and now she gets killed off in a slasher, and we just don't care and we move on. But here it's about getting us to care. We really feel bad for Casey Becker when she dies. We really feel bad for Sydney. We feel bad for all these characters that are being killed off, and it really adds weight and depth to all these characters that makes us care and understand, and the empathy of this movie is directed towards the teenage girls, which I think is a really revolutionary thing for a slasher movie. It was just as much a way of keeping it fresh and fun as all the smart sort of meta commentary that's been going on and all the references that Williamson infuses into the movie. And I think that's just as much a really strong element that this movie uses to keep it from just being like every other slasher movie, and I absolutely love that about it. I think another thing that really makes this a fresh sort of movie is the fact that it's using a sort of character, a villain, Ghostface, that is so common, and it makes it a little bit more disturbing and lifelike and realistic that these teenage boys would just find a Halloween costume that they can find, as Dewey says, that every five and dime store in the country is selling them. And that was actually a real thing, right? A lot of these, the costume was a real one that they found and they kind of used for the movie. And it was one that was already kind of a very common sort of anonymous Halloween costume that you could just throw on. It's like a ghost face. And that's what makes it so intimidating and scary, is it's just like every old kind of person, just any kind of teenage boy you could expect to maybe go off on a killing spree would be wearing something like that. And I think there's a sort of sinister menace that underlies everything. Everything feels so much more brutal with the voice changer and the way that they use the costume. And yeah, he's kind of bumbling around and stupid at times, but that also kind of makes it scarier because it makes it feel realistic. You're not just facing off against some paranormal, killing machine that's like 6'8" or whatever. This could be anyone. It could be your best friend. It could be your boyfriend. That's what makes it so scary. And I think it adds a level of obviously whodunit, which makes it a fun little mystery as well, which obviously that kind of got explored more and more as the sequels went along. It became more obsessed with like a whodunit aspect. And that is this aspect to this movie, and they use red herrings in a smart way, and they talk about it, and there's constant conversation about who the killers are, and that's what makes Randy such an effective character, is his obsession with movies. He's a stand-in for a lot of the horror movie fans in the audience that are like, no, this is what's going on, this is what's going on, and he calls it, right? He calls Billy's the killer, he calls it the dad's the red herring, but yet we're not fully sure because they really do a good job of sort of playing off on our expectations, like what exactly is going to happen, even though it does go down the way that you would expect a horror movie to go down with. Like, all the paths it goes are foreshadowed in such clever, smart ways that when they do actually happen, it's almost like a fun little gag, but also we're caring about these characters so much at the same time. So it doesn't feel like it's repetitive in any way. It's just such a smart and just intelligent way of intentionally doing horror movies the way that they've been done, but with such a level of sort of cleverness to it, and depth to it, and characterization, and humanity and heart, that this is the recipe for making such a great movie. And none of the copies of Scream ever got it right. Every movie that came out after Scream was thinking, oh, let's just make a smart, little, fun, self-aware horror movie. Let's talk about maybe like urban legends or things like that. And we'll use sort of like the hot young actors and actresses that are coming up of age, and we're going to dismiss all the things that actually made Scream successful. We're going to drop all the sort of humanity and heart and depth and smart writing, and we're just going to have cleverness to it, and we're just going to try and like give a nod to horror fans and to the audience, and look, guys, we don't even care about our own movie. We're above it almost. That's what it felt like. Whereas Scream felt like from the fans, for the fans, but subverting it in ways that would actually challenge us. Those ones, urban legend or whatever you want to talk about, felt like really dumb, cheap imitations that were only sort of masquerading as an intelligent movie. It was just trying to like, oh, look, we're above it. We're not actually horror fans. We'll just sort of give this to you guys because you're dumb audience members and you'll just accept it. You'll just accept a weird, cheap imitation that has some of the elements that you loved about Scream, but without any of the heart, humanity, or understanding of the genre that is so essential. So really, as the 90s went along and into the early 2000s, before sort of the splatter film movement really took off in the early 2000s, before that, and before obviously there was the Japanese remake craze as well that was going on, but there was that time period where it was really dominated by sort of like PG-13 horror in a way. Even though Scream is really brutal, that was another thing that I think makes a lot of the imitations not as effective, is they're not as brutal either. They all just feel like CW shows, and that's not what you want out of a theatrical horror experience. It's just not. And so I think that it was really a disappointing time, I guess, if you were a fan. I mean, I wasn't really alive and watching movies, but when you go back and watch them, it was like this just feels so stupid. And so every franchise then had to go that route. Halloween H2O ended up becoming like a Scream ripoff, but didn't have any of the understanding of how to make actually interesting characters and just tried to lean on the crutch of Jamie Lee Curtis without having actually interesting teenage characters or centering our empathy on them. Or, I mean, you barely even. Jamie Lee Curtis's character was just kind of seen as crazy in that movie. I feel like a lot of our understanding of her, it wasn't until the end where it sort of recontextualized. Oh yeah, I guess she was okay for being crazy this whole time because here's Michael Myers back as a supernatural figure. But it doesn't really get us to care about any of that until way later on, and it just wasn't as smart or as understanding of the genre as it needed to be or of its own series. And it just felt like a cheap sort of imitation in a really poorly done way. I'm just not a fan of any of those movies, and so I was glad when like the splatter films, when you look at those, I'm glad that that ended up becoming the dominant mode because it was something different, something fresh, and it could push the genre in a new direction. And while I don't like every single one of those movies, I think there was some really smart and clever ones that came out. And I'm always glad when the genre sort of is undergoing reinvention. And I think that Scream helped create a new reinvention, but it also kind of led to a lot of really poorly made films, which isn't this film's fault at all, but it is something that is an unfortunate sort of externality as a result of the overwhelming success that this had in a mainstream context. So again, not Scream's fault, not something I hold against the movie in any way, but it is an unfortunate consequence. Those movies were, for the most part, just really bad, pale imitations, which that's usually how it is in horror, but I feel like a lot of times when a new sort of cycle starts off, there's a lot more creative and like energy undergirding it, even if it is a lot of just kind of like cheap rehashes. But this one, there just wasn't as much interesting stuff. There's not as many iconic classic movies that I still love from that era. It's just kind of a forgettable era for horror, and one that was quickly dismissed with better and more interesting things. And now we're in a much better and healthier state for the genre in the present day. And so it'll be interesting to see what Scream 7 is able to do. What kind of commentary is it going to have? What's it going to center? Whose experience is it trying to sort of follow through? And what kind of empathy are we going to have for our characters? Are we going to care at all? Or are we so meta, self-aware at this point, and we're so far into the game, and we've been seeing these same recycled tropes and storylines and deaths over and over and over again. So we are so desensitized. We are the characters from the first movie. So what can Williamson do to actually push the series forward, the genre forward? I'm really hoping that something fresh comes out of it, because it can't just keep being rehashes that are just getting worse and worse as the film continues to deteriorate in quality. Because now we're getting to that point, like I've been saying with these other slasher movies, where we barely even give a shit about the characters. The only reason we have any care at all with some of the legacy characters is because we've seen them being brought back for movie after movie after movie. Like these newer people, like, first of all, I do not like Scream 6 at all, and I don't like that any of the, like, every single character was invincible. And I don't think that Kevin Williamson's gonna do that here. But at the same time, I just don't care as much about these newer characters. They just feel like cheap imitations that are trying to be like, look, guys, this is a stand-in for that character. This is the Randy of the modern crew. This is that. And it's more like trying to use the cleverness of references as the entirety of the intelligence of the writing, which that's not just what made Scream successful. It's not just that Williamson, stuffed the film full of references. It was that those references were used in an intelligent way within the design of the film. Scream 5 and 6 don't do that. And I think Scream 5 is okay, but Scream 6 really did just piss me off, and I think that was a waste of a film, and one that I was just really frustrated by. Maybe I'll give it another shot in anticipation of Scream 7. Maybe I'll watch those ones, but we'll see. But let's hope that Scream 7 can take some of the lessons that were learned from Scream and what makes it such a successful movie. Hopefully Kevin Williamson, as a director, can sort of channel his inner Wes Craven as well as his Kevin Williamson. You're right. Fuse those together, make something interesting, or push it in a whole new direction. I don't know. But I think Scream worked for so many ways that a lot of people that tried to imitate it did not understand. So that's about all I have to say about Scream for now. I mean, I guess I could continue to rant and rave and go on and on and on for another like 30, 40 minutes, because this is really an excellent movie, and a lot of the imitations are just piss me off. But I think I'll stop for now. I think I kind of gave my major points as to why I love this movie, and I think it holds up so well. And I think it's an expertly crafted horror movie by Williamson and Craven, with some small little critiques I would have, here and there, such as the Henry Winkler death scene, which was completely unnecessary, and I think the studio forcing it in was a dumb decision that doesn't really hold up in retrospect. But I think, that's okay. It doesn't really detract too much. And the movie just has a great energy and flow to it, and it's really fun, smart. It's a really good movie with some brutal kills, and it's a classic for a reason. It holds up very well. There's a lot of depth and commentary to it, and let's hope that Scream 7 can even, have a fraction of that heart that made Scream so successful. So with that being said, that's about all I have to say for today's video. I'll see you tomorrow with Scream 2. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end of the video. If you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications every time I drop a new video. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Come on. Don't touch me.
He's my superior.
Janitor's your superior.